Hey guys, welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about the structure, the basic structure and function of the heart. As we all know, the main function of the heart, or the heart in general, pumps blood throughout the body, delivering oxygen and nutrients to our cells and removing waste products. In this video, we will explore the anatomy of the heart and its important functions, including maintaining blood pressure and supporting the body's immune system. So let's get started. So basically, the human heart is a fist-sized organ located in the chest cavity. It has four chambers that work together to pump the blood throughout the body. The heart muscle is made up of specialized cells that contracts in a synchronized manner. The heart is regulated by an electrical system that controls its rate and rhythm. We'll be talking about the intrinsic conduction system in the coming slides. And maintaining healthy heart is important for overall health and well-being, which can be achieved through regular exercise, a healthy diet, and managing risk factors such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or even diabetes. So, as we said earlier, the heart is a vital organ in the human body. It pumps blood through the entire body, supplying oxygen, nutrients to various organs, cells, and tissues in the body. Now, in this slide, we are going to be talking about the basic anatomy of the heart. So, as we all know, the heart is divided into four important parts. We have the upper part of the heart is called the atria, also known as the right atrium and the left atrium. Now, and the lower chambers is known as the left ventricle and the right ventricle. So, basically, before I explain the function of these structures, you have to keep one thing in mind. The right side of the heart deals with the deoxygenated blood. Whenever you think about the heart, think divide it into two parts, the right and left. The right side of the heart carries or deals with the deoxygenated blood, and the left side of the heart handles the oxygenated blood, because as we all know, the left side of the heart or the left ventricle is responsible for pumping the blood to the rest of the body, and the blood will obviously be oxygenated. So the right side handles the oxygenated and the left side oxygenated blood. So the human heart is a complex organ with four chambers, each receiving the oxygenated blood from the body. So what happens is that now the blood coming from the upper part of the body, which is the head, the arms, and the chest or the thoracic cavity, will drain into the superior vena cava, and the inferior vena cava will carry the deoxygenated blood coming from the lower part of the body, which is basically the abdomen and the legs. So the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava is not shown in this diagram, but the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava are the veins responsible for carrying the deoxygenated blood and draining the deoxygenated blood into the right atrium. So the first thing that happens, or the first part of the heart that receives the deoxygenated blood, is the right atrium coming from the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. So the right atrium will receive this deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. After that, the right atrium will pump the blood into the right ventricle, passing the tricuspid valve. The tricuspid valve is also known as the right atrioventricular valve. Keep this in your mind. The tricuspid valve, this is the tricuspid valve. It is known as the right atrioventricular valve, or the tricuspid valve, and its main function is to prevent the backflow of blood from the right ventricle into the right atrium. The valves in general ensures unidirectional flow of blood. There are two types of valve. We have the semilunar valves. The semilunar valves are basically the valves between the arteries and the ventricles, such as the pulmonary artery and the aortic valve. The pulmonary valve and the aortic valve. These valves are known as the semilunar valves because their main function is to ensure the unidirectional flow of blood between the ventricles of the heart and the arteries. And the atrioventricular valve, which is the tricuspid valve, and the bicuspid valve ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the atria and the ventricles. Semilunar valve ensures unidirectional flow between the arteries and the ventricles, whereas the atrioventricular valves is between the atria and the ventricles. So coming back to our main point, as we mentioned, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava drains the blood into the right atrium. From the right atrium, now keep in mind, we're talking about the right side of the heart. The one way to differentiate between the left side and the right side of the heart, you could see this region here. This region is called the apex region. If you see this region, it means that this side of the heart is the left, and this side of the heart is the right. So the apex will basically help us in identifying the parts of the, if you are confused, if you see the apex region, it means this is the left side of the heart and this is the right side of the heart. It helps us to identify the right and the left side of the heart. Anyways, getting back to our main point, so we have the superior vena cava, which will drain the blood into the right atrium, the deoxygenated blood. The right atrium, the deoxygenated blood will be pumped by the right atrium into the right ventricle, passing the tricuspid valve. Now, from the right ventricle, the blood will be pumped passing the pulmonary valve. This region here, a flap-like region, is called the pulmonary valve. Yeah, as shown in the diagram, this is the pulmonary valve. It ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery's main function is that it carries the blood from the right ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation. Keep in mind, pulmonary artery carries the blood away from the heart, because artery as in A stands for artery, A, away from the heart. The arteries carry blood, in general, arteries carry blood away from the heart, and veins carry the blood towards the heart. So this pulmonary artery, the function of the pulmonary artery is to carry the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation. So the right ventricle will pump the blood passing the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery carries the blood into the lungs for oxygenation. Now, after oxygenation, after the blood has dropped off carbon dioxide and picked up oxygen, the freshly oxygenated blood has to come back to the heart in order to be pumped to the rest of the body. So the vein responsible for bringing the blood from the lungs back to the heart is the pulmonary vein. The pulmonary artery carries the deoxygenated blood away from the right ventricle to the lungs for oxygenation. The pulmonary vein, on the other hand, will bring the oxygenated blood from the lungs into the heart to be pumped to the rest of the body. So the pulmonary vein has the oxygenated blood coming from the lungs. It will drain the oxygenated blood into the left atrium. The left atrium receives the oxygenated blood coming from the lungs via the pulmonary vein. The next step, the left atrium pumps the oxygenated blood that has come from the lungs into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle will finally pump the blood into the aorta to be pumped to the rest of the body. Okay, now the left ventricle, as we mentioned, we'll start with it, we'll go through it again. The left atrium receives oxygenated blood from the pulmonary vein. Left atrium drains the blood into the left ventricle, passing the mitral valve. This is known as the mitral valve, also, or the bicuspid valve. The left valve is called the mitral valve or the bicuspid valve, separating the left atrium from the left ventricle, and the left ventricle will then pump the blood into the aorta to be pumped to the rest of the body. So the left ventricle, when it pumps the blood into the aorta, the blood will pass through the aortic valve. Now this valve is another example of semilunar valve. As I mentioned earlier, the semilunar valve ensures unidirectional flow of blood between the ventricles and the arteries, and the atrioventricular valves, which is the left and the right, or the tricuspid valve, and the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve, ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the atria and the ventricles. So getting back to our point, the left ventricle pumps the blood into the aorta to be pumped to the rest of the body, passing the aortic valve. This region here is called the aortic valve. And another point is that we have the septum. The main function of the septum is that it only divides the heart into left and right side, preventing mixing of the oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. And then another point is that the left side of the heart, or the left ventricle in specific, has a thicker muscle mass, or a thicker surface compared to the left side, to the right side of the heart. The left ventricle is usually thicker than the right ventricle, because the left ventricle has to pump the blood to the rest of the body, to the aorta, in order to be pumped to the rest of the body. Therefore, the left ventricle logically should have higher muscle mass in order to generate high pressure in order for the blood to be pumped to the rest of the body, whereas the right ventricle does not require a thick muscle mass, because it only pumps the blood to the lungs, which is close to the heart. Therefore, it does not require to generate that much pressure, like the left ventricle. So that's pretty much it about the anatomy of the heart. We have, as I mentioned, the chambers. We have the 4 chambers, 2 atria, 2 ventricles, separated by valves. Valves ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between, we said that the atrioventricular valves ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the atria and the ventricles, and the semilunar valves ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the arteries and the ventricles. We have 2 types of semilunar valves, aortic valve and pulmonary valve. Pulmonary valve prevents the backflow of blood between the pulmonary artery and the right ventricle, and the aortic valve prevents the backflow of blood or ensures the unidirectional flow of blood between the left ventricle and the aorta.